Hello adventurers, Andy from Twisted Narrative here, and today we're going to start a series of videos as we take a deep dive into the Shadowdark rules, where I will not only be reading them out but also explaining how I would interpret them and how I plan to use them at my table. Just in case you are new to the channel and not aware, very passionate about Shadowdark. I have been ever since I got my uh, grubby little hands upon the quick start rules. I kickstarted it immediately. I've got the full rules now, which is what we're looking at, and I'm currently running 3 different campaigns for Shadowdark. So it shows it can be run as a campaign system. I'm running Junkers, which is a horror sci-fi setting for it, Tales from the Smoke, which is a diesel punk urban setting for it, and something that I call Times Undreamed of, which is very much what I would call Shadowdark Prime, the fantasy, dark fantasy setting of an age long forgotten. Um, I've put all those links down in the chat below if you want to check any of those actual plays out, but you're not here for that. You are here for the rules. So let us call them up. Introduction, and as we come down here, a quote: "In these nighted halls, doom and glory boom eternal. This is the story of the Shadowdark." Nice and evocative. That is page 5, and as we kind of move down, there's a little bit of prose to give you the feel of it. They were crawlers, and so they dared the lost halls of the Shadowdark. They went down through the old trapdoor in the rusty mug cellar, greasing the owner's palm with a few silver drems. First came the spiders, prickling legs, burning fangs. They descended on silent threads from the dark high ceilings. Krieg finally burned the skittering devils to ash with gouts of magical fire. The carved stone walls grew denser, darker. Uh, Iraga almost lost her head to a scythe snapping out of the wall. It was Ralina who found the hidden door behind the demonic statue, and so they went deeper. The workstone turned to damp cavern walls. Distant hisses and screams echoed in the pitch black, and leather-winged abominations swooped in with their hooked talons, tearing at Jorbin's shield and flesh. But the treasure they found, dusty gold coins stamped with forgotten emperors, fat rubies dangling from silver chains, glittering swords plucked from the hands of mouldy skeletons. Soon the torches grew thin, the wounds grew numerous, and the magic grew weak. The crawlers had met their true foe. It was all around them, never slowing, never sleeping, and never ending. It was the Shadowdark, and the fight had only just begun. Beautiful and evocative, and it kind of sets the scene and gets those juices flowing of what is all this about, especially if you're new to a role-playing game. It also gives you a hint and a feel at the type of feeling that Shadowdark is trying to create at your table. More on that in a minute. Shadowdark. What is Shadowdark? Shadowdark RPG is a fantasy adventure game where you and your companions delve into buried ruins, lost cities, spider-infested forests, and even fearsome dragon lairs in search of gold and glory. The Shadowdark is any place where danger and darkness hold sway. It clutches ancient secrets and dusty treasures in its rotting claws, daring fortune seekers to tempt their fates. With your adventuring companions at your side, you confront the Shadowdark's sinister traps, formidable magics, and ruthless monsters. If you survive, you'll bring back untold riches plucked from the jaws of death itself. And before long, you can hear the Shadowdark's call once again. So, it sums up what Shadowdark is, but what defines this game? Speed, danger, and simplicity. Magic is perilous, and battles are fast and deadly. Being clever is crucial for survival. Shadowdark RPG is rules light and intuitive. It encourages quick decisions rather than hunting through the rulebook for answers. In this game, a torch only holds back the pressing darkness for 1 hour of real-world time. There isn't a moment to waste when the flames are burning low. So, sort of taking in that paragraph in Shadowdark, I'm not overly sure whether it's a mechanic used by some other games. It's the first time that I've heard of it. But yes, 1 hour of real time sort of equates to 1 hour of game time if you are burning torches. Now, it will say later on in the rulebook that common sense applies, but it normally applies that you can say, well, we want an hour to pass, so you will burn up one of your torches, for instance. But this mechanic, as simple as it is, it changes the nature of the game. It means that you don't have time to have circular discussions. You, as characters and as players, need to make decisions, move forward, and it, in the games that I've run so far, does cause the pace of the game to move swiftly, um, and create a tension, but not a tension of frustration, a tension of what is going to happen next. We need to move forward. We need to make a decision on what we know at the moment of whether we go left or right, rather than having, as I said, an hour discussion about something that in reality the characters and the players are assuming rather than working on real facts. So I love this. I really do. How do I play? Let us move down to this. Everything you need to play or run a game is in this tome. Turn to the next section to get familiar with the basics. Fair enough. So we just have to read the book. So the basics. Okay, interesting. If this is the first time playing Shadowdark RPG, it is helpful to start with a pre-made character. The free digital Shadowdark RPG Quick Start set has a few rules. I'll put a link down. There is the Quick Start rules that you can get for absolutely free from Drive-Through RPG. It will give you a small book for the players, a small book for GMs, and it does indeed. You can sort out some pre-gens as well for you. Right, characters. You decide your character's actions and tell them to the referee or games master, GM. The GM determines your actions are successful, if your actions are successful, and describes the results. This back and forth between you and the GM and your adventuring companions grows and shapes the game world. Always ask yourself, if you were really your character, what would you do right now? So, yes, for those of you who are familiar with role-play games, that must sound fairly straightforward. For those of you who are new to role-playing games, yeah, you have this avatar, you have this character, and that is your eyes to this game world, and the GM will explain what you see and you can react in character to it. So describe an action. On your turn, you describe an action you want to do. For example, you could say you're going to shoot your bow at a troll. The GM might ask you to do a check, see checks later on, to determine whether your action is successful or whether your action succeeds. So yeah, you just literally say, I would like to try and do this, and the GM determines whether you need to roll or whether it just works. Movement. During your turn, you can move up to near which is approximately 30 feet. You can break this movement up in any way. If you don't take an action, you can move near again. So those of you familiar with other games, yeah, round about 30 feet. And if you don't take an action, you can move another 30 feet or so. What Shadowdark does is it doesn't define a near as exactly 30 feet. So cinematically, and to keep the action flowing, if you are close enough, roughly round about 30 feet, you'll get to your objective. Rounds. Let's come down here, show you this. Each person takes a turn, starting with the GM going clockwise. The GM controls the monsters and environment and narrates how everyone's actions change the game's world. Once everybody has taken a turn, that completes one round, and then the new round begins. Now, this is interesting. Again, I'm not sure whether other systems use this, but I'm not familiar with any that do, in the fact that everybody gets their piece of the pie each turn. This isn't combat rounds. This is just how the games work. GM explains something, and then we move around the table clockwise. GM responds to people, and then the GM once again explains what you move on to next. Then we move down to dice. Okay, those of you who play role-play games might be familiar with these, but those of you who don't, this is what the dice that you will need. You will need a 4-sided dice, which is termed a D4, a 6-sided dice a D6, 8-sided dice a D8, 10-sided dice a D10, 12-sided dice D12, and 20-sided dice D20. So that is the way that they reference these. The polyhedral dice, you'll get them from any local game store or from the internet. Multiples 3d6 means that you roll 3 6-sided dice. You roll them and then add it together. When it says multiples, advantage, you roll 2 times and use the better result. Disadvantage, you roll 2 times and you take the worst result. Then statistics or stats. Stats are your characteristics. Each stat goes from 3 to 18 and has a bonus or penalty called a modifier or mod from -4 to +4. Your stats are strength, which is physical power, dexterity, agility, reflexes, constitution, endurance and resistance to injury, intelligence, logical ability, wisdom, instinct and willpower, charisma, appeal and presence. Let's just kind of move those down for you there. Checks. When attempting a risky action, roll a d20 and add a modifier. The modifiers are based off your stats. This is called making a check. The GM chooses the check's linked stat and a number called a difficulty class or DC. If the total of your D20 roll plus your stat modifier equals or beats the DC, your action succeeds. For example, the GM might say leaping over a narrow chasm requires a DC difficulty check, 12 strength check. Roll a D20, add your strength modifier. You need to get a 12 or higher. Hit points. Injuries cause you to take damage and lose hit points or HP. Typical weapons deal 1d6 damage to your hit points. You regain lost hit points after a night's rest. Characters at 0 hit points die in 1d4 plus constitution modifier, minimum 1, rounds. Dead characters are retired from play. So if you reduce to 0 hit points, you then roll a d4, add your constitution modifier, and if you are not healed or brought back, that is where your character dies. What's next? You could play a whole game with just the basics, but once you're ready for more, the next chapters expand upon them. So we'll scroll down to this beautiful, beautiful artwork of some crawlers or adventurers, as we come to here. And this is where we will bring this video to an end. Next video we will move on to characters, where we will have a much greater look at character generation. So if you found this useful, please give us a subscribe and a like. Watch out for more content. Part 2 will be talking about characters in depth. In the meantime, adventurers, keep those torches lit.